This is Emma Daly, Director of Collections and Exhibitions at the Seward House Museum, reporting in the field. The battlefield, that is. I'm here at the Battle of Bull Run with my history-loving family. So,
Daly, what are you doing in Manassas? At least go somewhere with a Seward connection.
Oh, is this better?
Yeah, fine. Just get some good footage.
Welcome to another episode of Collections Unboxing with me, your host, Emma Daly, Director of Collections and Exhibitions here at the Seward House Museum. To commemorate the anniversary of the Battle of Monocacy, we have some artifacts related to William Seward Jr. and his role in the battle. Will was the youngest son of William and Frances Seward. Although he grew up to be a battle-tested soldier, he had a rambunctious childhood. Family lore holds that he had to be yanked out of a bar at age 12. He would later try out several different careers before finally ending up as a banker. Despite a newly born infant daughter, Will enlisted to fight in the Civil War in 1862. He was named Lieutenant Colonel of New York's 138th Infantry, which later became the 9th New York Heavy Artillery. Originally stationed around D.C., the 9th was put to work building up the capital's defenses. Due to the influence of Will's father, the Secretary of State, they mostly stayed close to Washington, at least until Ulysses S. Grant took command of the Army and turned them into frontline infantry soldiers. This is where we find Will Jr. in 1864, having recently survived heavy combat at the Battle of Cold Harbor. Now, in July of that year, he was headed into the fire again at the Battle of Monocacy. I could have filmed more of the Monocacy battlefield when I visited, but instead I decided to call in a professional field correspondent to help me out. Matt Borders, a park ranger at the Monocacy National Battlefield, is going to give us a bit more background information on the battle. Take it away, Matt.
Hello from Monocacy National Battlefield. The Battle of Monocacy was fought on July 9, 1864, a culmination of an aggressive campaign by Confederate forces to get above the Potomac and strike at Washington, D.C. What has happened is that they have actually been defending their resources during this campaign. United States forces under David Hunter have been moving through the Shenandoah Valley, tearing up telegraph lines, tearing up railroads, and angling for Lynchburg, Virginia, that important railroad crossroads. All the grain and hoofstock of the Shenandoah Valley has been passing through Lynchburg on its way to Richmond and Petersburg, and Grant wants to shut that down. Of course, Robert E. Lee needs to keep those supplies flowing, so he has sent the 2nd Corps, under the command of Lieutenant General Jubal Anderson Early, to Lynchburg to help to defend that crossroads. Early will be successful, driving back David Hunter's forces and eventually driving him from the valley. Early has been told that if he can clear the valley, he should proceed north, cross over the Potomac, and strike at Washington from the north. The plan is that will relieve pressure on Richmond and Petersburg, forcing Grant to relinquish his hold on those locations and race his forces back to Washington to defend the capital. In addition, it is 1864 and Abraham Lincoln is up for re-election. Any blow towards the national capital could be a huge blow to his re-election campaign. Now, Confederate forces will have between 12 and 15,000 men and around 38 to 40 cannon, where United States forces here at Monocacy will have about 6,600 men and 7 cannon. Major General Lew Wallace has a thrown-together force of his own Middle Department troops, many of which are 100 Days men, and veteran troops from 3rd Division, 6th Union Corps that have been raced up here to the battlefield, including the 9th New York Heavy Artillery.
Once the battle began, William Seward Jr. would find himself in the thick of the fighting.
Here at the Battle of Monocacy, the 9th New York Heavy Artillery is commanded by William Seward Jr., the colonel of the regiment by this point, and his line of battle eventually will be right where I'm at. In 1864, there was a rail fence dividing these two fields. Now, the 9th New York at the beginning of the day had actually been facing north earlier in the battle, but it had also sent 2 companies across the Monocacy River to skirmish with the Confederate advance. By afternoon, however, Confederate forces had begun to cross to the west of us, and the entire formation, Ricketts Division, 3rd Division, 6th Corps, will be ordered to swing to the west, and the 9th New York Heavy Artillery will advance across these fields to the rising ground in the distance. From there, they will engage Confederate forces, specifically Terry's brigade of Virginia troops around 3 p.m. Those Confederate troops will actually put a lot of pressure on this portion of the Federal line, eventually forcing it to fall back to this position, where the Federals will hold for about an hour. From roughly 4 o'clock in the afternoon to about 5, we will have Federal forces along this line, stretching all the way to the south of us down to Araby Church Road. The 9th New York Heavy Artillery is in this relative position, and William Seward Jr. was noted for sitting erect in the saddle in the middle of his lines during this firefight. He will be wounded here on this field. His horse will be shot out from under him, and when it collapses, it will break his leg. Slightly wounded in the arm, he will actually be propped up by 2 of his soldiers commanding this engagement until, off to my right here, the 110th Ohio began to give way due to intense artillery fire coming in on their right flank from across the river. The 9th New York line begins to fall back. Colonel Seward will be going with them. Eventually, he will find a donkey, which he will escape on from the battlefield.
After the battle, the Seward family in Washington waited for news about Will. Things seemed grim when at midnight, Secretary of War Edwin Stanton told them Will was wounded and a prisoner. The next day was hectic and panicky, but a dispatch from General Lew Wallace soon arrived confirming that although Will was wounded, he was not a prisoner. Now let's take a look at some of the artifacts from the battle. Right here is the jacket that Will Jr. wore when he was fighting in the Battle of Monocacy. Now, he was shot off of his horse. He had an arm injury and a leg injury and took refuge under an apple tree. So right here we can see his uniform has some dirt stains. There's a hole here that goes through the fabric and the lining. It could have been where he was shot, but I can't say that for certain. So besides the dirt here and the damage here, we also have right here in the collar the sweat line. Because remember, this would have been a hot summer day in July in Maryland. So of course he's sweating on top of everything else that's going on. Then we have this hat that was worn by Will Jr., though I don't know which battle he would have worn it in. We do know that it is his hat. And finally, that apple tree I mentioned that he rested under after he was injured. Years later, men from his company went back, found that tree, and they took wood from it and had this cane made for Will Jr. in 1892. And on the handle here, it has an inscription saying that that's exactly where it was taken from. So it's amazing that we have these artifacts still in our collection, which tell the story of Will Jr.'s service during the Battle of Monocacy. One more artifact that we're about to show you is a silk parade banner from Will Jr.'s regiment that was commissioned by women here in Auburn, featuring the work of local artist George Clough. It has the list of several key battles the regiment was involved with, and if you take a peek at the top, you'll see Monocacy. Although Will escaped from Monocacy, the battle was a loss for the Union, but maybe not a complete loss. Let's go back to Matt for a bit more.
Confederate forces have done it. Jubal Early has won the day and driven Federals from the field, pushing them off to the northeast. Those Federal forces will eventually fall back to Ellicott Mills, what is today Ellicott City, and eventually to Baltimore. Jubal Early's men, however, have been delayed a full 24 hours. They have lost an entire day's march by fighting here at Monocacy, and they've also sustained about 900 casualties. Early will go into camp for the night before pressing on the next day. The Battle of Monocacy felt very much like it does today, 90-some degree heat, and that same heat and humidity will continue as Early is up before dawn on July 10th and begins pushing south towards Washington, D.C. He's going to do that 35 to 40 mile march in about a day and a half, pushing down the Georgetown Pike, this crushed stone road, and kicking up tons of dust as he goes. Miserable marching conditions for his forces. They are going to be so worn out by the time they reach Washington, D.C. around midday on July 11th that while they will skirmish with some of those fortifications outside of the Capitol, Early will allow his men to go into camp once more to rest before the final push he's envisioning to bust through those forts around the national capital. Of course, all through that afternoon and evening, though, he can hear Federal reinforcements arriving. The rest of the 6th Corps, the 19th Corps, the veteran reserves, the United States colored troops, and even the United States Navy will be involved in the defense of Washington, D.C. And the Federal garrison is so heavily reinforced that they will actually attack on July 12th, pushing Early back from the very edges of the District of Columbia. By the end of the day, Jubal Early recognizes he will not be breaking into Washington and is preparing his troops to withdraw back to Virginia, which began on July 13th, eventually falling back all the way to the Shenandoah Valley, leading us towards the eventual 1864 Valley Campaign and the destruction of his forces.
So thank you for joining us for another episode of Collections Unboxing, and a special thank you to Ranger Matt at Monocacy.